You finish an intense conversation, an unfinished argument, or a task you had to abandon halfway. And hours later, it's still sitting in your mind. Meanwhile, the 10 things you actually completed today, barely a trace of them left in your memory by evening. This isn't random. It's a specific, well-documented psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik Effect, and once you understand exactly how it works, you can use it deliberately to remember more, procrastinate less, and finally get unfinished thoughts to stop quietly draining your attention in the background. In the 1920s, Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik was sitting in a Vienna cafe with her mentor, psychologist Kurt Lewin, when she noticed something curious about the waiters. They could accurately recall the details of complex, unpaid orders, sometimes several at once, but almost immediately forgot the details of an order the moment it was paid and closed out. Intrigued, Zeigarnik designed a formal experiment. Participants were given a series of small tasks, puzzles, simple constructions, arithmetic problems, and roughly half of these tasks were deliberately interrupted before completion, while the other half were allowed to be finished normally. Afterward, participants were asked to recall as many of the tasks as they could. The result, published in her 1927 paper on finished and unfinished tasks, was striking. Participants recalled the interrupted, unfinished tasks roughly twice as often as the tasks they had actually completed. Completing a task appeared to give the mind permission to file it away and stop actively holding on to it. Leaving a task unfinished appeared to keep it active in working memory, as though the mind treated it as an open loop still requiring monitoring. This became known as the Zeigarnik Effect, the tendency for incomplete or interrupted tasks to be remembered more easily and intrude on conscious thought more persistently than tasks that have been completed. This single finding explains a surprising amount of everyday mental experience and, more importantly, gives you a set of specific research-supported tools once you understand the mechanism behind it. Let's look at both. Consider how often this pattern shows up without a name attached to it. An unfinished email sits in your mind all day, even though it would take 5 minutes to complete. An unresolved argument replays on a loop long after the conversation has physically ended. A half-read book, a half-started project, a decision you keep meaning to make but haven't, all of them tend to occupy disproportionate mental space compared to their actual size or urgency. The Zeigarnik effect suggests this isn't a failure of focus or self-discipline. It's your mind's memory system doing something closer to its intended function, treating unresolved tasks as active items requiring ongoing attention, precisely because, from a survival standpoint, unfinished business historically mattered. An unresolved threat, an unmet need, an incomplete plan were all things worth continuing to track. The problem in modern life is scale. Where earlier humans might have had a handful of genuinely unfinished concerns to track at once, a modern day often includes dozens of small open loops simultaneously, unanswered messages, half-finished projects, unresolved conversations, each one quietly consuming a slice of background attention, all at the same time. This is a major, underappreciated contributor to the feeling of mental clutter and low-grade background stress many people carry without being able to point to a single specific cause. Here's a counterintuitive but well-supported implication. The Zeigarnik effect suggests that simply starting a task, even without finishing it, meaningfully changes your mind's relationship to it. Once a task moves from not started to in progress, it becomes an active open loop your mind is tracking, which tends to increase the internal pull to return to and complete it rather than avoid it entirely. This is part of why the just start for 10 minutes strategy used across many productivity approaches is genuinely effective. It's not simply psychological trickery. Starting a task appears to activate the same open loop tracking mechanism Zeigarnik identified, which then works in your favor, quietly pulling your attention back toward completion rather than continued avoidance. Practically, if a task feels overwhelming to approach, doing any small, concrete first step, writing one sentence, opening the relevant document, making the first move, appears to shift the task status in your mind from a dormant, avoidable, someday item into an active, open loop your brain is now motivated to close. If unfinished tasks stay active in working memory because your mind is treating them as unresolved, then externalizing them, writing them down in a concrete, trusted place, should, in theory, reduce that mental load. Research on this specific application, sometimes called the brain dump or written intention effect, has generally supported this. Simply writing down an unfinished task, along with a concrete plan for when you'll address it, has been shown in multiple studies to reduce the intrusive background mental pull of that task even before the task itself is actually completed. This gives a precise, practical explanation for why to-do lists and planning systems work as well as they do. Not because writing something down magically makes it happen, but because it appears to signal to your working memory that the open loop has been captured and handed off to a reliable external system, reducing the need to keep actively rehearsing it internally. Let's bring this together. The Zeigarnik Effect, first documented nearly a century ago from a simple observation about waiters and unpaid orders, reveals something specific and useful about how your mind actually manages attention. Unfinished tasks are held active in memory, intruding on conscious thought precisely because they remain unresolved, while completed tasks are filed away and largely released from that ongoing mental tracking. This explains why small, unfinished items so often feel disproportionately loud in your mind compared to their actual size, and it gives you two concrete, research-supported tools to work with that mechanism instead of being quietly drained by it. First, starting a task, even a small, imperfect first step, shifts it into an active, open loop your mind is now motivated to help you close, which is part of why beginning is so often the hardest and most important part of any task. Second, externalizing unfinished items through writing, with a concrete plan attached, appears to reduce their intrusive pull on your working memory even before the task is actually done. None of this requires more willpower. It requires understanding that your mind was never randomly cluttered or distracted. It was tracking open loops exactly the way it evolved to. The fix isn't fighting that mechanism, it's giving it fewer things to legitimately worry about by starting more and writing down the rest. So here's the question. What's one unfinished open loop that's been quietly taking up space in your mind right now? And what would it take to either start it or write it down with a real plan attached? Tell me in the comments. This is Turn Wiser, and I'll see you in the next one.